Okay, I want to give a lecture on the physics of surfing, and I hope to clean out the whole topic of surfing in terms of how to surf to some extent, and what is surfing from a physics standpoint, and what's some of the math that goes behind it. And so I have this list here of all the topics which I've tried to arrange in a semi coherent structure. And you can read them off. I'll probably break this into several pieces in terms of smaller videos. But let's just kind of dive in. So surfing is inextricably linked with rocket science. And why is that? It's because we launch from the beach. And so if you're going to be in the rocket business, in the space business, it's inevitable that eventually you're going to end up on some coastline for some extended period of time. And let's just look at that for a second. So let's draw the United States. The United States, we launched from two different locations. We launched from Cape Canaveral, which is in Florida, and we typically launch due east. Cocoa Beach is right nearby, and that's a great surf spot, a really pretty beach. And then we launched from Vandenberg. There's a place here where the coastline kind of goes like that, and we launch typically south. And there's a number of nice surf spots there. One in particular, Halama State Park. Anyway, so that's the two places that the United States launches from. But it turns out virtually every other country that has a space initiative launches from a nice beach. And in fact, most of them are on surf lines. So the European Space Union, European Space Agency, they launch from French Guiana, which is, if this is the equator, it's somewhere essentially on the equator, and they launch east. And but they launch from the coast. What am I drawing here? They launch from the coast. And if you look on Surfline, the French Guiana apparently is a pretty nice place to surf and hang out. And even the North Koreans, they launch from the water. I think the Dear Leader has some nice palaces out here. Apparently they have nice beaches in North Korea. And anyway, they launch from the beach also. I don't know if they surf in North Korea or not. There's only two countries that do not launch from the beach. And ostensibly, there are two countries that just put a lower value on human life. China, of course, and Russia. Russia, by virtue of where it's located, they don't really have much coastline, I think, available, and they have all that vast empty space. But they've always launched in the middle of nowhere or over their own people. China, from what I can gather, they just launch right over their own people. I think they really could care less. Why is it that we launch only over the water and the ESA launches only over the water? It's because if there's a problem, the rocket isn't going to hit anybody. It's just going to go in the water. And we also have an easy way to drop stages as we go through the initial minutes of the flight. So that's the reason we always launch from water. And in previous videos I've discussed why launching due east is useful, or why launching due south is also useful. So that's why rocket science is related to surfing. It's then if you look also, the LA Air Force Space Division is located right here in Los Angeles, and that's where they manage most of the military space program. And there's a lot of defense contractors and rocket companies in that area. SpaceX is in Hawthorne, California. There are a few companies that are other places, but essentially you cannot be in the space business and not have been to Ron John's. So that's that topic. Let's talk about what's a wave, and why is a wave and a breaking wave significant. Now, I don't have any fancy pictures of surfing videos or ocean shots or whatever. I'm just going to draw all cartoons, but hopefully this will be understandable. So if you have a wave in the water, it looks like any other wave. A wave is a wave. And what happens is that the bottom is way down here. Then the wave, the surface wave, is essentially not related to the effects of the bottom. But as you get closer to the coastline and the bottom comes up and you have less depth of water, then what happens is you have friction develop. And so the top part of the wave the bottom part of the wave is going to be affected by the bottom, and it's going to slow down. The top part is not, and it's going to override the bottom part, and you end up with a breaking wave. So here's a wave, and this is a breaking wave. I hope this is still on the screen. The perils of a one-man production crew. Let's draw it over here. So a breaking wave is something where essentially the momentum of the top part of the white wave has overridden the bottom part. And you get a face, and you get a back or whatever. It's not, the terminology is not that important. And so typically surfing is only done on a broken wave, or a wave right before it breaks. I mean, actually after it breaks, then you end up with something that looks like this. You have turbulence. The surfing is over at that spot. Surfing happens in between this phase here, a so-called green water wave, and where you start to get it to be breaking. And in fact, if you look at places that are good places to surf, what happens is the point where the wave is breaking, as the wave comes in, it's going to start breaking here, and then this will start spilling over, and then later on this part will start spilling over, and so you have that sort of cascading effect of it breaking, and you can surf it up until the spot where it starts to break. And in fact, the best place to surf is right in that spot, right where it's about to break. So we'll talk a little bit more about what makes a good wave and how to tell a good wave later, but let's just first of all understand that waves and breaking waves are two different animals. Now, the other thing you might wonder about is what's different between surfing and just being in the water. If I'm just floating in the water, or I put a piece of cork in the water and it's floating, and then a wave comes through, and the wave moves through, this cork is going to essentially go up and down. It might make a slightly circular pattern, but it's essentially going to go up and then down, and then end up back in the same spot, and the wave is going to go on. So that's essentially, it's floating there. There's no surfing involved in that. In order to surf the wave, surfing is essentially, here's a non-scientific definition of surfing. Surfing is the same as skiing down a hill of water. So the key thing is, before you can start surfing or skiing down this hill of water, you have to be moving at the same speed as the wave. So the first thing in surfing is paddling, because unless you can paddle your surfboard fast enough, you'll never catch the wave. And achieve that position to be surfing it. It'll just pass underneath you, and you'll just be like the piece of cork. So the first thing is you have to match the speed of the wave in order to catch it. And we're going to show later on with the mathematics of physics of waves that as wave height goes up, wave speed typically increases. And that means you have to go faster. So in order to catch a bigger wave, you have to paddle faster than in order to catch a smaller wave. That's why sometimes people have longer surfboards, because they want to catch a bigger wave. In Hawaii, at Waimea Bay, where they have among the biggest waves on the planet, when the conditions are right, which doesn't happen very often apparently, they have this thing called the Big Gun. It's a special surfboard. It's really long and thin, so you can get speed, but it also has a tail configuration that allows you to stay in the wave. We'll talk about that later on. Now, the story of where did the term Big Gun come from? Well, it goes back to I think the 50s and early 60s, when people were kind of first getting into big wave surfing, and somebody said, well, if you're going to hunt elephants, you better have a big gun. And so that's where that came from. So in order to surf the wave, you have to be going as fast as the wave, first of all. Then that allows you to catch it, and then it's a matter of maneuvering to stay in the right spot and to not have the tip of your surfboard dig in, which is called purling, and then in which case you go flying forward, and surfing is over in that situation too. So that's a little bit about surfing versus floating.